I know it seems like clickbait, but it ain't. The 13th of July was my 12-year anniversary of moving to the UK, so I thought that this would be the perfect time to explain my journey of becoming a UK citizen. Got this like 2 months ago. Still got that new passport smell. I'm also going to answer some questions you guys submitted on Instagram and YouTube about my journey to becoming British. That's right, I'm British. Big F you to the trolls in the comments who are always like, why should we listen to you? You're not even British. Look at me now. And yes, I will cover why I was banned from the UK. Let me start with the visas that I have been on since moving here. So I moved to the UK back in July 2013 on what is called a spouse visa because I married an Englishman. And after the 2.5-year mark, I was eligible for my second spouse visa. And after the 5-year mark, I was able to get the indefinite leave to remain visa, ILR, which is basically like a permanent residency visa. And that was really important because a year later is when my then husband and I decided to end our marriage. And because I was on that visa and not a spouse one, which obviously depends on you being married, I was able to stay in the UK even though we got divorced. Thank goodness. Now, technically a year after I got indefinite leave to remain, so around my 6-year mark, was when I was first eligible to get my UK citizenship. But to be honest, I wasn't really in a financial position to get it. I also wasn't super motivated because of Brexit, so the citizenship lost a lot of the flexibility that it used to have. And in theory, I could have stayed on indefinite leave to remain for the rest of my life in the UK as long as I didn't leave for like a couple of years. And for the last couple of years, I have been like, you know what, I really should get it. But I kind of like pushed it off and pushed it off. And then came November 2024, when, you guessed it, a certain person got reelected in the United States. And at that moment, I was like, you know what? It's time to become British, because I knew I would not, at least in the next 4 years, but probably forever, ever move back to the US. And it was important for me to have a backup. Because as we're seeing in the US, just because you have a valid visa and have done things the right way doesn't mean that something terrible can't happen to you. And I feel very lucky to even have this as an option. So on New Year's Eve, I submitted my application for British citizenship. A couple of weeks later, I went and got my biometrics done. So that's when they take like your fingerprints, and I waited. And then after a trip to Dubai in March, I was on the Elizabeth line heading back home from Heathrow Airport, and I checked my email and I had one that said, congratulations, you have been accepted as a British citizen. Make sure you schedule your citizenship ceremony. So a few weeks later, I was at Hackney Town Hall with my friend Kelly, who was my +1, and my friend Nina, who also got her citizenship, taking pictures with a British flag next to a huge photo of King Charles. And then I submitted my application for this straight away after so I could make sure I didn't have any delays in my travel plans. And it came like 9 days later, fresh and ready to go for some trips. Now, if you're like, okay, where does this ban come in? We do need to rewind a little bit. A few months before my actual move, in early 2013, I hopped on a plane over to the UK to see my then boyfriend and to stay in the UK for a few months on a tourist visa to spend time with him and also wait while going through the process to get my Italian citizenship, which that's a whole nother story that I will not be getting into. Ultimately, I didn't end up getting it because the process got really delayed and long and expensive. Now, this part is a really long story. It's also fairly traumatic to relive. It involves another person who I am no longer in contact with. And it's something that I don't want to fully put onto the internet for anybody to just give their 2 cents on or to criticize. So I've thought about how to best present this story. So what I'm gonna do is give you the top line TLDR of what happened. Basically, when I got to Heathrow, the immigration officer pulled me aside to question me, and that was done on and off for about 9 hours. And ultimately, basically, she decided that the evidence I had put forward that I had intent to leave the UK before my tourist visa was up was not sufficient. And therefore, she was denying me entrance into the UK, but also putting a ban on myself and my passport from coming back into the UK indefinitely. Do you see where the traumatic bit comes into play a little here? I had been told that the country that my then boyfriend had grew up in and was living in, I was not allowed to come back to it for an infinite amount of time. Obviously, that was a very, very difficult day for me and him and everyone involved. And the very short story of it is that this man and I, who were very much in love, were told that the only way to overturn this ban that I had was for us to get married. And so we did, very happily, even though we'd only known each other for a few months. And then I applied for a spouse visa from the US. It took about a month to put everything together. And then once we sent it off, it was a very stressful week of waiting to see if I would get approved. And then I get a package from UPS at my parents' house that has all the documentation I had sent through, like screenshots of our Skype calls, our text messages, wedding cards that our family and friends had given us. All that got sent back to me. There was no letter, but I go to my US passport, open it up, and see that I have a visa stamped into it from the UK. So I booked a flight to the UK straight away and got over there about 2 days later. And for the most part, everything's been okay since, for the most part. I did get held for questioning every single time that I went through border control for about 3 years. That was always fun, but then it stopped. Okay, so now that that's explained, let's go through the questions that you guys submitted. Now, do keep in mind, I am not an immigration lawyer. I'm not an expert at all in visas, immigration law, any of this. In fact, I had to skip a lot of questions people submitted because I was like, I don't know, how am I supposed to know the answer to this? But I am answering the ones that I feel confident in. But again, this is not any legal advice or anything like that. Do you need to pass a language test? So because I am from an English-speaking country, for none of my visas did I have to do any kind of language test. Do you have dual citizenship? Is it hard to get? Yes, so I have US citizenship still, and now I have UK, obviously. That's because both the UK and the US allow their citizens to have multiple citizenships. There's been a little bit of talk that Trump might change that, which would be devastating. Hopefully not. Can you talk about the requirements and the exam you have to take? So basically, back when I did my indefinite leave to remain, I had to take what's called the Life in the UK test. At the time, it was 25 multiple choice questions about history and culture and things that are British. I bought books to study and read up. I did lots of practice quizzes on this app that they had, and I actually passed on the first go. Go me. And because I did that for indefinite leave to remain, I didn't have to do it for my citizenship again. What are the hardest and easiest aspects of applying for UK citizenship? I didn't actually think it was that particularly hard. I think the most difficult bits were I had to find 2 referees that were British citizens that could sign this piece of paper that basically said that they find me to be an upstanding citizen, and they vouch for me. So I had to arrange times to get them to physically sign those. And then the other thing is that you have to list all of your travel outside of the UK and where you went for the last 5 years. And that's partially because they want to know, I think, where you've been, but also you have to have been in the UK for a minimum amount of days over the last 5 years. And they want to make sure that you've done that. So it took a little bit of time to kind of go through that. But because the 5 years included COVID, I didn't really have any travel plans for a year and a half or so. So that made it easier. Any resources for getting a job in the UK, getting visas and sponsorship and stuff. So I've never had to get sponsorship because of the visas that I've had, but I do know it's very, very hard. There is a resource. There's a woman that runs this company called Migrates, and she helps people with finding jobs that can sponsor you and also helping with convincing certain employers to sponsor you. But do keep in mind, it is a very hard process. Did getting divorced from a British citizen affect your process at all? No, it didn't, because I was long divorced by the time I applied for citizenship. Because I got divorced in 2019, so many, many years. How is the process of applying? Did you get someone to help you? No, I did it all by myself. In fact, out of all my visas, the only visa that I employed an immigration lawyer was for the first one, because we were dealing with the ban on me going to the UK. So we wanted to make sure everything was done correctly. But everything else I did myself. There was a couple, the first 2 visas, I definitely cried a few times. It was very stressful, but this one, I think I'm grown, I'm more mature, and I was just like, it's gonna be fine. No need to cry. In reality, how affordable is buying a house in London? It's not. And renting's not really isn't affordable either. For context, the average salary in London is £41,000 and the average house price is £552,000. So you do the math. Talk about the gift they give you. I'm awaiting my ceremony and so excited for the free pen. First of all, congratulations, Yvette. So what she's talking about is usually get a little gift when you go to your citizenship ceremony. And the one that I got was because I did it at Hackney Town Hall. They gave us little canvas bags that said, "I love Hackney." So it was really cute. What can you really expect when moving to London? I'm trying to be realistic, but I doubt I am. I don't know where you're from. So moving to London for you could be a step up compared to where you're from, or it could be a step down. I will compare it to the US because that's where I'm from originally. But basically, London's like any major city right now, not any of them, but a lot of them, where life is not that easy. Costs have increased significantly. Renting even is super expensive. The job market is also not great right now. So I feel like I'm sounding really negative. But at the end of the day, just like many places in the world, how much you're gonna love London and also how comfortable you're gonna feel really just depends on how much money you have. So make sure you're looking up rent prices so you have an idea of that, and make sure also you look at like salaries for jobs that you would be getting and make sure that that kind of all aligns and you can make it work. What are the benefits to you now having citizenship versus your prior statuses? So the main thing is I can now vote in all elections. Obviously that's extremely important. It also means I can get onto the electoral roll, so that actually helps my credit score. And I indefinite leave to remain, they can take that away if I leave the country for a while. They, in theory, cannot take my citizenship away now that I have it. In theory. You never know these days. Hit us with the cost of all the visas along the way and getting citizenship. So because it's been a long time, I can't remember exactly the individual costs of each visa, and also like 2013 prices are way different from what they are now. However, I did a couple years ago calculate how much my visas have cost me, and I believe I said the first 3 in total were like just under 10 grand in pounds, and then citizenship cost, I believe it was £1,600 altogether. And actually the ceremony is free if you don't want to do a private one. You have to pay for the private one, but I did group one, which I thought was really beautiful. How does healthcare work while not being an official citizen? So if you have a visa, you have access to the NHS, which is the free healthcare system here. These days, visas, they include an additional cost called an immigration healthcare surcharge, which is basically a lump sum that you pay, I guess, to like have access to the NHS. That wasn't a thing when I got my first visa, if I remember correctly. And I didn't have to pay for that for citizenship. But yeah, I've been able to use NHS from the moment that I moved here. I also pay taxes. So that being said, people come on visas who are like stay-at-home parents who don't technically pay taxes, but they also have access to healthcare. Will you still collect US Social Security in your retirement? I think that's dependent on a few things. I'm not 100% sure. However, I am not anticipating that US Social Security will be, probably it will exist. I'm not anticipating the amounts that I will get when I'm older will be anything of substance anyway. Do you find yourself having to explain America and its politics to a lot of Brits? So first of all, keep in mind that I'm based in London and a huge chunk of people who are in London are not British. I would actually say probably 90% of my friends are not British. Okay, that being said, people here keep up with politics. Everyone is seeing what's going on. I mean, I'm filming this a bit early, so there's a lot going on in the US at the moment, and it is all over the news. So I would say people are pretty informed. It's not necessarily they're asking like, what's going on? It's more of like, what is going on? Oh my God. It's just kind of disbelief at the madness. And also they're interested in my take on things. So sometimes I will give it. Sometimes I'm like, can we just focus on this cocktail? I just don't want to think about it right now. Very privileged, I understand. How is it with taxes? They seem really high to me, and I heard there's even more than that to pay. I mean, I don't know where you're from, so it's hard to say if it's high or not. I guess you're asking relatively. If we were to compare to the US, this is something I hear a lot. I think a lot of like US politicians must use the tax thing and saying like, oh, they get taxed so much over there to probably say that like that's the reason, why we wouldn't want to do socialized healthcare, which I think is silly. But if we were to do like a comparison, so this isn't my exact situation because I pay myself salary plus dividends from my business. So the dividends are taxed differently than salary. But just for simplicity, let's say, and this is around what I make, let's say I have a salary of £70,000 here in the UK. My effective tax rate would be 26%. So that's including and covering like the marginal tax rates that we have here. If I was back in New York State, which is where I'm from, it would be 21% with federal and state tax. And obviously that's not a huge difference. Also, if I was living in the city, it would be more. This is also very simplified. I am aware it doesn't include like deductions for various things and paying into pensions and stuff like that. And of course, at different salary points, those numbers can change drastically. However, I would also say that even though in most instances our taxes are a bit higher, we do not have healthcare costs. So like, holy moly, that's a huge difference and a huge lifestyle cost that we are not having to foot the bill for. So I would argue that that is very much worth an incrementally more tax amount that we pay. Dealing with taxes as an American citizen in the UK. So yeah, it's a pain. This is something that when people are on social media and they're like, oh my God, like move abroad, it's amazing. And they really romanticize it. Like, dude, romanticize your life if you want to. However, nobody talks about when you move abroad that it severely complicates your tax situation. And that's because the IRS/the US are basically the only country in the world that treats its citizens that live abroad as like, why would you do that? And we still want you. We still have to, like, that was a weird voice. Is that the IRS voice? Basically, all other countries don't do this. The UK is changing a little bit, but all the other countries, they make it way simpler. As long as you stay out of your respective country for a certain amount of time, then they're like, okay, well, you're being taken care of in that tax jurisdiction. If you come back, just let us know. Is the process faster when residents have real jobs? Some YouTubers are not able to get visas or something. I mean, YouTube's a real job. Do you not think what I do is a real job? I mean, I'm working hours like more than it's a real job. So, but no, your job doesn't really affect the process. I'm not really sure exactly what you mean, but you either have a visa and you work on that visa or you don't live and work in the UK. So generally no. When do you get your accent? Will it all be at once or gradually over time? So when adults move to a different country, they don't really change their accent. And honestly, if you meet somebody who has, you should be very suspicious of them. After your divorce, was it a hard decision to stay and become a UK citizen? So the decision to stay, I did think about it for a while that year that this was all going on, but ultimately, it was such a difficult period that if I had moved back to the US, it would have made it infinitely more difficult because I would essentially have been starting my life over again. I would have had to completely let my business go that I'd been building up for years. And also I had friends and a life I built here for the previous over 5 years that I would just be leaving behind. And so ultimately I knew that that wasn't going to be the best option for me. So I decided to stay. How much would you say you need to live pretty well in London, and how much would you need to make to live in central London with roommates at least? Okay, so it's hard to say because live pretty well is very different for various different people and what you value in life. If you want to live central London and you're okay with roommates/housemates, I would say like 45K minimum you're probably going to need to make, probably a bit more than that. People make it work with less, and then there are people who are like, I could never survive on that. I have over the last couple of years been taking around like, again, salary dividends, 70 grand, and I felt pretty comfortable with that. However, that is going to change, and I'm definitely going to have to pull more from the business soon because my landlord is selling my flat, so I will have to leave probably in the next 2 to 3 months. and my rent and therefore my housing cost is gonna go significantly higher because I've been on a pretty good deal for a few years. So yeah, just to give you an idea, I'll definitely have to be making more. My question is, did you ever feel unwelcome or like an outsider during your path to citizenship? So I have gotten this question a few times, and I find it interesting because I am a white, middle-class, English-speaking American. And there are relatively few places in the world that I feel like I would feel unwelcome, or I would actually be like not welcome to be there. Being a woman, that kind of throws a bit of a spanner into it, so that's a bit different. I think though that anyone who's in a similar position to me, if they complain about some place that they felt like an outsider or they were not welcome, how do I say this? I feel like many times that is an extremely entitled take. I mean, sometimes I hear people that go to like various places in Europe, which are very, very friendly to Americans, and they will complain like, oh, we were in Florence and like, we just did not feel welcome. And then you find out that they went on a cruise, which dropped them off with 10,000 other people into the center of the city, which then crowds the streets and makes it really hard for the locals to live. And like, of course they're not gonna be welcoming and friendly. Like, what do you expect? I also think when you have a US president sicking ICE onto you with a valid visa or not, just because you look Mexican, then come talk to me about feeling like you're not welcome someplace, okay? And sorry, that's no hate to the person that asked that question. A lot of people have asked that. I just think that people who are in privileged positions like me need to have perspective. What was the weirdest citizenship question you were asked? Okay, so on the test, this is many years ago, so I actually don't remember any of the questions except for one, and it was, what holiday is celebrated in the UK on the 25th of December? And I was like, oh, I know that one. Christmas Day. Boop, check that. And yeah, so I was like, at least I know I got one right. And I did, so that was good. Okay guys, wow, if you made it to the end, thank you so much for watching and following along on my journey. And if you've been here for a while, I truly appreciate how long you've been here and just following the story and watching and keeping up with everything that I and my team have been doing. Have a great day, and hopefully you'll go watch one of my other videos soon. Okay, bye.